Well, hello again and welcome back to my channel. Now, just under a year ago, I posted a video on how to paint an OSB wall when I decided to paint one of the walls here in the workshop white. Now, I appreciate the method I went for was on the more expensive side using water-based Zinsser Bullseye 123 with some Sandtex smooth masonry paint over the top. Now, the video did okay, and then about 6 months ago, it started to do a lot better, mainly from my friends over the pond in the US. Now, I don't know what's happened there, but maybe it's something to do with the cost of plywood or people looking for alternative methods of cladding their workshop or some of their spaces and deciding to paint it with OSB, which is a really good product. So yeah, that video is going really well, and the comment section gets very engaging with people asking me, can you just paint with masonry paint straight on? Can you just use emulsion? Does it have to be Zinsser? You know, all these kind of questions flooding in, and I didn't have the answers, but I suppose there's only one way to find out, and that's to conduct a series of experiments, which is why I'm in here today. Okay, so before I get stuck into the different methods and techniques I'm going to do, if you have clicked on this video in order to try and find out the results of this experiment, then I'm sorry you're going to be disappointed. You're going to have to come back to the channel in a few months where I'll do a follow-up video looking and analysing the different results. You can follow me on social media, and I'll leave a link in the description below, and I'll do regular updates on there. So just a little thing about the OSB before we start looking at the different primers and paints. If you don't already know, and apologies, this is a little bit of a scruffy piece, but it's just something to show you. It does have a finished side to it, which is kind of more smooth. It must have had some kind of additional wax or resin applied to it, and that would be the side that you'd be looking to paint, because that's going to be a finished side on the inside. And you can see quite a difference here. If I flip it round, the actual back side is quite, it's rougher, not finished, a little bit more of a scruffy side to it. So that'll be the back end, and this would be the facing side on the inside of your workshop or your space or whatever. Now, the first question that crops up is, would you need to sand that finish, that kind of waxy residue or whatever, or can you apply paint directly onto it? Well, my honest answer is I don't actually know, but I did sand it on the walls in here, which worked really well. But if you're on a bit of a budget or time constraints, can you actually get away with applying a coat onto an unsanded piece of OSB? So in this experiment, what I'm going to do for all the different finishes, paints and primers I'm going to use, they are going to go onto both a piece of unsanded OSB and a sanded piece, and we can compare and contrast them in a few months' time. So the first question that crops up, and all of this is from the comment section of my previous video, is can you just put a coat of emulsion on it and leave it at that? So let's find out. There's only one way to do it. So I'm going to apply a coat of emulsion both onto an unsanded piece of OSB and a sanded piece of OSB, and the same goes for masonry paint, which cropped up. Can you just slap some masonry paint on and get away with it? So there'll be masonry paint going onto unsanded and sanded OSB. Then we're getting into the world of actually priming the OSB before you're applying a top coat. Now, I was looking for a cheaper alternative before we get to the kind of Zinsser-y stuff, and I had a look for an oil-based primer, and I've got some Rustins oil-based primer for use on bare wood. So I'm going to apply a coat of that, and then I'm going to apply a top coat of emulsion onto one piece and a top coat of Sandtex or masonry paint onto another piece. Again, both unsanded and sanded. So we're up to 4 different techniques up to now. Then we're getting into the kind of more expensive stuff. So the Zinsser Bullseye, the 123, which I used in here, I'm going to do that more or less as a test standard, really, because that's the technique I done in here. So it's going to be Zinsser with a coat of emulsion on it and Zinsser with a coat of masonry paint on it. Again, unsanded and sanded. So we're now up to 6 different methods. And then finally, if you are on a better budget, shall we say, a little bit more, feeling a bit more flush, the Zinsser BIN, which I believe is a shellac-based primer and often considered probably the best on the market. So I've got this to run alongside all the other ones, and I'm going to put a coat of this on it, again sanded and unsanded, and I'm going to put a coat of emulsion over the top of it and also a coat of masonry paint, which takes me to 8 different techniques of either applying just a top coat or a primer and a top coat. And also, if I'm factoring in sanded and unsanded, that will be 16 different blocks on this piece of OSB. Now, I have waffled on for ages, so I've got to get on with it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split this up into separate pieces. I'm going to sand half of it down, and then I'm going to apply the primers, leave it for overnight, come back tomorrow, and then apply the top coats across all of them, including the untreated stuff and including the non-primed bit. And then I'm going to leave it for 3 months or 4 months and come back to you then. So let's crack on with it and see how we get on. Morning. All right. Now, these first coats have gone on. I did make a mistake, but I managed to rectify it. So we've got the emulsion here, masonry here, oil-based primer, and then I went Zinsser. I've had to go back to oil-based primer because I remembered I've got to do an oil-based primer with an emulsion and then an oil-based primer with a masonry paint, sanded and unsanded. So them two are split up, but the water-based Zinser's here, the Bullseye, and the Zinsser shellac-based stuff is over here. Now I'll scan it along. It's quite interesting already. Now I have explained in my previous video, painting this stuff is nasty. All right, it's horrible because you've got to like really work the paint into it, and it soaks it up a treat as well. But it's difficult to tell that the Zinsser's very bright and white. The Bullseye, the oil-based primer, obviously has that slight tint of yellowish, so it's difficult to tell where it's at with that. But also the big difference, as you'll see as you go along, is the difference between the prep surface, sanded surface, and an unprepared surface. It was really difficult. The paint wasn't really going into it. It was skimming onto it, if that makes sense. But it's a really interesting experiment to compare and contrast the two. So because I want to be quite thorough with this, I'm going to do another coat of undercoat, or primer, sorry, before going with the emulsion and the masonry paint top coats. So on these first two here, I'll do, because these don't have any primer or undercoat, I'll do another coat on there, and then I'll do another coat of oil-based, another coat of Zinsser Bullseye, and another coat of Zinsser shellac-based, and then I'll leave that to dry completely, and then I'll come back at it with 2 coats of either emulsion or masonry paint for the top coats. So that is, I think if you were doing that as a project, as in you were painting a wall, that's probably how you go about it. So I think the experiment needs to be as close to that as possible. So, right, I just finished my brew, and then I'll get back on with this, and then see how we get on. Morning, it's top coat day. Now I thought I'd bring you down to this angle because I think it shows off a little bit better under these lights. The colour that it actually dries, the primers dry. So here and here is the oil-based primer. This here is the Zinsser Bullseye, and the bottom 4 bits here are the Zinsser shellac based. So as you can see, this is very bright white. This is kind of an off white really. When you put them next to each other, there is quite a big difference. So now it's time for top coats, and each section or each different type of primer. So this one here is going to get 2 coats of emulsion, and the other oil-based primer is going to get 2 coats of masonry here. So 2 coats of emulsion, 2 coats of masonry, 2 coats of emulsion, 2 coats of masonry. Now I'm not going to win any painting awards for the way this has gone on, but for the top coats I'm going to put it on with the brush and finish it with the roller to try and give it a nicer finish, or slightly nicer finish. Now one, even maybe two, you might be asking, why have I not used a cheaper water-based primer like an acrylic primer undercoat, which would be a cheaper alternative to the Zinsser Bullseye? And the simple answer to that is I forgot, because I've got some here, which is some Leyland acrylic primer undercoat. So once this is all finished and this video's wrapped up, I will find some more OSB and do it with this stuff. I kind of know the answer to this though, because my YouTube friend Dave at Grumpy's Workshop has had some experiences with undercoating this OSB using this stuff, so you might want to go and check his channel out as well. Right then, I will get on with it. Yeah, coat on, plenty of time to dry. Oh, one last thing, yeah, I did notice yesterday, the oil-based primer takes a lot longer to dry. And I mean as in hours longer. I came back last night and the Zinsser stuff dries really quickly, and this stuff 4-5 hours later was still a little bit tacky to touch. So if you're in a bit of a rush, be mindful of that one. Okay, you need to give it plenty time to dry. Right, let's crack on. So there we have it, the conclusion of the initial stage of this experiment. And at this point, they are all looking very lovely and nice and shiny and pure, brilliant white. But of course, this experiment is not on the initial coat and finish. The test is going to be time, unfortunately, and I will revisit this later on in the year or early next year, and I will provide, as I said earlier, regular updates on my Instagram and Facebook accounts, and there's links in the description to those if you'd like to follow it. Very, very interesting this is going to be, comparing the different products right next to each other, so you'll be able to see if there's any yellowing, discoloration, all that kind of thing. I'm going to try and see if I can get it up on the wall somewhere, because I need to get this out of the way, really. And the late comer to the party, so I will do that probably tomorrow, is to do, when I find some more OSB, is to do some acrylic primer undercoat with both emulsion and masonry paint over the top, because, as I said earlier, I forgot. So any suggestions or comments or feedback on this video would be very welcome, folks. So please leave a comment down below if you think there's things I could have done better, differently. You know, I'm always learning as I go along. But as ever, take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.